share. So first of all, thank you all for coming tonight. So excited to have Brad Baker here with us, and that you all took the time. I know there's a few people who weren't able to come, so we're going to record it. You can always rewatch it or share it too. But Brad, I have to give you a little idea of how we met. So Brad and I think met through a mutual functional medicine practitioner, and you actually interviewed me on a podcast, correct?
Correct. Yep.
I think this was gosh, how many years ago? 5?
Yeah, it was pre-COVID. Yeah.
Pretty close to 4 or 5. It was pre-COVID, and so then COVID hit, and I got long COVID, and my shoulder froze. I mean, I could not, remove clothes. I couldn't put on clothes without debilitating pain. I couldn't work out. I had no energy. I'm like, who can I call? I'm like, Brad. And so I recruited Brad to come help me, and holy moly, he is a miracle worker. And the one thing that I just adore about Brad is he is so professional. He is so talented, and he just sits and listens, and he knows exactly what to do and how to adjust things. So he actually brought my shoulder back to life, and I have recommended him to many other folks for that reason. But again, I think Brad and I have talked about even putting a program together down the road. But since then he's had 2 little ones, so he's been a little busy. So we are going to meet tonight and just talk about a lot of, I like to call them debunking thoughts and thoughts that we have around exercise and metabolism. So I would love to just jump in. Hopefully you guys have some questions too. So I'm going to ask Brad some questions, and then we're going to go. So wait, before we go on, let me pull back. Sorry, I got so excited. Brad, so you're the physical therapist. Tell us what you're doing now. Where is your passion? What are you currently doing for your practice?
Yeah. No, thank you for the intro. That was far too kind. But so initially I was in sports orthopedics, physical therapy for about 5 years. And then from there started my own PT practice and really enjoyed the training side as well. And saw some gaps as far as the physical therapy into training world. There's kind of a gap there on that crossover and clinicians working together within that space. And so I kind of do both. I do training, I have my own PT practice, and I really just enjoy, I don't know, kind of like Cindy said, just hearing where people are at and just trying to help give them solutions and whatever that may be. I'm far from an expert. I have a lot to learn, but I think it's just something where I just enjoy helping people and talking to people and doing the best I can to help them in whatever way I can. So that's what I'm doing now. And yeah, like Cindy mentioned, we have a lot of common interests more on the proactive side of healthcare, right? How can we go later into life and still feel good and still move well, and try to avoid a bunch of medications or a bunch of surgeries or those things as proactively as possible. So that's kind of where we're at.
Excellent. Well, let's dig in. So first question, got to ask about metabolism, because as we go through our different stages of life, we feel like our metabolism just really drops into a deep dark hole, and it's hard to get out of that. So how do we shift how we work out as we age to help keep our metabolism strong, and also our general health and our weight and our body composition? And I think one thing that I heard in a recent podcast on metabolism was an interesting thought. We tend to think that our metabolism is dropping because we're aging. Our metabolism, what I learned from the podcast, is lowering because we're gaining body fat. And that can happen naturally if we don't do something about it. And that is where physical fitness comes in, right? What are we doing? How are we moving? So Brad, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the whole metabolism front in regards to how do we keep that revved up as we go through our different stages of life.
Yeah, I like that. I like that quote. And I think that's an empowering one as well, in that an oversimplification, but in general, our bodies are going to have slower metabolism with higher fat tissue, faster metabolism with higher muscle tissue. And with that, we can maintain and build muscle at every stage of life. So kind of wherever we're at along that longevity journey, we can continue to do that. And so I think the biggest thing, well, a couple of things, but one of the biggest things I want to get across is the importance of some form of resistance training, right? At every stage of life. And I think sometimes when we hear that, it's like, oh, I gotta, go to the gym or lift weights or get on this machine. Resistance training can literally be sitting down to a chair and standing up from it, like doing sit to stands repetitions. It can be a deadlift, which again sounds like, okay, you got to go grab this bar and lift it up off the ground. A deadlift can literally be a bag of groceries that you hold in your hands and you just hinge down to the ground and come back up. There's a lot of functional patterns that we're already doing in our day. And if we can just do them repetitively as exercise, it can really build those muscles and those patterns to keep us strong and functional later into life. And so I think the other thing that I really want to focus on is like reframing, again, how we look at exercise and working out. I think we feel like we have to feel bad at the end of it, be extremely fatigued at the end of it, need to have a bunch of sweat going, need to be in the gym for an hour. Like that is a form of exercise, but it's not one that's necessarily going to get you closer to your goals. And especially, obviously, Cindy's working on that systemic inflammation side of things, and she can speak to that a whole lot more, but crushing our bodies with workouts isn't going to help that in any way. It's not going to help our hormones. It's not going to help, in those realms. So I like to think of it as just like, what can you do for 10 minutes or 15 minutes? It can be at home. It can be with household items. It can be with, different homemade weights, like whatever it might be. Finding something that is functional, that is challenging for you, but isn't going to cause breakdown of your joints. And that is something slightly beyond of what you would normally do, right? Like slightly beyond the threshold of what feels comfortable. So if we grab 1 pound weights and we're doing squats, maybe that's a good challenge right now. 3 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now, we should grab heavier weights, or we should try squatting a little deeper, or we should in some form or fashion progress that, because that is how our body's going to build muscle versus just trying to maintain what we have. Another thing, I know I'm going on a tangent here, so please cut me off, Cindy, at any time, but a body in motion tends to stay in motion, right? Physics taught us that. And so that's something where we can use that to our advantage with a couple different ideas that I want to share with you. One is movement snacks. Okay, that is after you have a meal, after you consume food, doing 2 minutes, 2 to 5 minutes of very light, low-grade activity, like a walk. I know it gets cold in Minnesota in the winter, so literally just like walking around the main level of your home, or walking up and down the stairs 5 times, or whatever it might be, that's slow, low grade, isn't going to get your heart rate to totally spike up, but it's going to help with how your body absorbs those nutrients, and it's going to help with that insulin response. And again, Cindy is way more of a genius in that realm than me, so you can ask her more about that. But that's one thing. And then the other would be mobility minutes, which that is something that I'm very passionate about, in that you know your body better than anybody else does. Like, you know your own body better than I ever will, better than Cindy ever will, better than any health practitioner will. So like, what are the areas where you feel your stress? What are the areas where you feel tight, or you feel limited, or you tend to get pain when pain does come on? And have that be your area of focus at a couple different times in the day. Okay, so whether we're working or whatever we have going, have an alarm on your phone, have a sticky note on the fridge, somewhere that you're going to see frequently, that reminds you, oh yeah, I should do this stretch, or I should do this quick activity. And it'll probably take like 1 minute. Just some rehab exercise focused at what your area of need is can really make a big difference, because we tend to be in the same positions a lot throughout the day. We sit for 8 hours plus on average, sitting in the car, sitting for meals, sitting when we're on our computer, sitting when we're watching TV. Everything we do is in that same position, right? Which is putting our hips in a position where they get tight, putting our posture in kind of that forward position. So these mobility minutes can really help to offset that. which if you feel better, you're going to move more just inherently. So those are two things that I think are very important for getting us to move more so that our metabolism can be higher, because, you know, even if we get a really good workout in, if we're sitting the rest of the day, our metabolism isn't going to be significantly higher.
That is awesome. So I took down some notes. I want to ask you some additional questions there. Number one, with movement snacks, I love that term. Just make sure you're not literally snacking while you're moving after dinner when your metabolism is lowest. Thought that was cute. So a few items. We got to talk about activity versus exercise, because I think that's another confusion tactic, which you kind of were leading into, but I think, you know, just having more of a clarity around that, especially with all of the sitting that we do. What about, and I think in regards to what you mentioned, like if you're starting with like 1 pound weight to do a certain type of activity, maybe in a couple of weeks you increase it to 3 pounds. I think that's super important. I know we have mainly girls, and then we have, you know, TJ and Brad on the call. I know I've worked with a lot more women in regards to fitness, and not that it's just women. I think men can do the same thing, but I find that sometimes we get into this rut where, hey, I'm supposed to do 8 to 12 reps. So I get to 12 reps and I'm done. I finished my set. And then I go back and I do it again. And we never really tune into, hey, I'm fatigued. I can't physically lift one more time. So I think that's really important, is to really tune into how you're feeling. If your muscles are fatigued, you can tell that your posture is starting to shift because it's hard to lift that next rep. That's when we need to be increasing the weight to continue to build that muscle by loading it. The other thing, what was I? Oh, that just brought up. Okay, that'll come back. Oh, well, women, like women versus men. I think, you know, historically working with women, we're afraid to lift too much weight because we think that we're gonna look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, not now, but maybe, you know, 20, 30 years ago. So that's one thing that hormonally we're not set up to do, correct? Brad,
Correct.
like we're not going to build muscle like that.
No, not by any means. And yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. It is something where there is that fear. I think for some men and for women, of, okay, if I lift in this form or fashion, it's going to result in me getting super big or super having these massive muscles. And it's just really not the reality of it. That comes down more to your diet and your nutrition. If you're eating at maintenance or in a deficit, you will not like get massive with muscle. It's just not possible. Not to mention the more muscle that you have, the higher metabolism will be, the more that you will burn fat. So even like when somebody starts training with me, a month in, their weight probably doesn't change. Even if their goal is weight loss, their weight doesn't change because we're adding muscle while losing fat. So it stays relatively the same. You can do like the DEXA scans, which are like super good and look at your body fat percentage relative to your muscle. But without that, it's like, oh, okay, I've been working hard for a month now and I'm not seeing progress with the weight. And that's where it comes down to looking at, okay, how are your clothes fitting? How are you feeling? What's your energy? You know, some of those things, because as you build that muscle, then the weight will just come off later. So it's typically, for me personally, I would say around like the 3-month mark, which probably sounds like daunting, of consistency, that the pounds just start falling off, because now you have built up that muscle where your body's able to react to it and then can start to, with that higher metabolism, burn the fat better. So not to mention there's, you know, when you're lifting weights, there's more influx of water, there's more retention of that. So yeah, just a note.
And muscle weighs more than fat, correct?
Yeah, if you take the same size, yes.
It would. So that's part of that whole weight debacle. What about resources? So like if people on the call, you know, are now inspired to maybe do some weight training if they haven't already, but yet they don't have a gym. They don't really have a whole lot of resources. at home, what would be some things that would be easy to look into in regards to equipment and or guidance? Like what and how do I make sure that I'm doing it correctly, that my form is safe?
Yeah, I mean, as far as equipment, I really think that a lot can be done just body weight. And then I would say either resistance bands, which you can get on Amazon for like $12 to $18, with like the handles, and they're kind of like nicer ones, or some dumbbells. With dumbbells, they have adjustable ones, which are nice because you can like, again, as we were talking, like progress in that way. If you just get like one set of dumbbells and you use those for everything, they're good for a while, and it's good to have. And you can use them in different ways and change up your tempo to make it challenging, but it's nice to have that progression so that you can continue to, again, build muscle and lose fat. As far as resources, I can share some, maybe I'll just email like some links to you afterwards as far as ideas. In general, I would say, if you're really new to exercise, I would try to just get a coach, even if it's for a little bit of time, to just like learn the movements, learn kind of what things you should be doing. That's what I would lean into, just because, again, the rehab side of my brain is like, I don't want to just throw like, hey, do this, 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 and then have no context of like how you're moving your body. And then there can be breakdown or joint issues or whatever it might be. So I know that's kind of a cop-out answer, but I really think having somebody who can, in person or virtually, see you move a couple times is very valuable.
Perfect. And then can you explain the difference between activity and exercise?
Yeah. In what context specifically? Because like I'm thinking of like NEAT, which is like non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is basically like how active you are on a given day, that burns calories, but it's not like specific time that you're exercising.
Is that
I
like
think that
fidgeting?
what's that?
Is that like fidgeting? Like even
It
just
can be,
like moving?
fidgeting. It can be me walking up the stairs to go get food. It can be um, anything that I do really in a day. And it's kind of a fine line, because like if I bring my dog on a walk, is that exercise or is that activity?
Right.
Like, I don't know. It's kind of relative to the person a little bit as far as like what is taxing you. I don't have like a great finite answer of what would fall under what category, because it's a little bit person dependent. But I think the point that I want to make on it is to not just have exercise be your form of movement within a given day, and to not just rely on that as the thing that's going to make the biggest impact, because it is that the NEAT, the non-exercise activity that you're doing, that can really make a big difference as well, even if it is just those walking for 2 minutes after a meal, or getting up and down the stairs, or doing some sit to stands throughout the day, or when you're watching TV, right? Do 5 sit to stands.
Okay. So just movement. And so I think that was what I understand is more outside of like structured exercise. Like if you're going to do a structured cardio activity, or you're going to do a structured weight resistance activity, you still want to move throughout the day.
Yeah.
I think that's, yeah, you're mentioning that. Okay. What about inflammation? Like how do we exercise to keep inflammation down, as we go through stages of life? And then what if we have joint inflammation that makes it harder for us to move?
On the first point, as far as inflammation, I think the big thing is not overtraining, listening to your body. If you have any signs of overtraining, which is like increased difficulty sleeping, increased irritability, feeling more just generally fatigued throughout the day, losing your appetite, all those types of things where it's like, hey, maybe you're doing a little too much too soon here. And so listening to how your body feels. Or another big one is having more aches and pains. Like if we start exercising and a couple weeks in, you're like, hey, I actually feel like more painful in my joints than usual. And there's going to be soreness with exercise, and that's normal, but having that kind of sustained over time is a red flag that we're doing too much too soon. So let's dial it back. So I think the biggest thing there from an inflammation standpoint is avoid overtraining, and that comes from listening to your body, and understanding when you're pushing it a little bit too hard. As far as if you have, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, is there validity to variety? Because I've had like people that I used to work with like decades ago who got into like a walking program, and then they would have Achilles issues or plantar fasciitis because they were walking every single day for a long period of time. So is there any guidance in regards to should we do something different versus the same activity on a regular basis?
Yeah. Okay. Good point. Thank you for steering me there. Most ideal, like in a given week, like the most ideal thing you can do for longevity, which coincides with less inflammation and your body just feeling better, is having like 2 to 3 days of resistance training. And again, that doesn't have to be massive workouts, but two or three times a week where you are resistance training and you are taxing your muscles in that format. 1 or 2 days where you're doing like zone 4, zone 5 work, which what I mean by that is there's heart rate zones. So like zone 1 is us just chilling and talking right now. It's just resting heart rate. Zone 2 is more like kind of like a brisk walk, but you can still hold a conversation. And then zone 4, 5, and zone 3 is kind of in the middle. Zone 4, 5 is like higher intensity intervals where your heart rate's kind of spiking and then coming down, spiking, coming down. And the nice thing with that is it's really person dependent. Like if you don't exercise a lot, if you just walk up and down the stairs briskly a couple times, your heart rate's going to be elevated. And then rest for 30 seconds or a minute until your heart rate kind of starts coming down, and then do that again. And I said, yeah, 1 day of that, and then 2 to 3 days of zone 2 work, which is just like a brisk walk, where you can still talk during it, or the elliptical, or kind of a steady state, easier, relatively cardio activity is kind of what the research shows is like most ideal for longevity. And as far as like duration, because maybe you're taking that and you're like, okay, how long for each thing? I would say a good starting point would be try doing 15 minutes for the resistance training, 2 or 3 days a week. Try to do 10 to 15 minutes of the high intensity one, where maybe you're walking up and down the stairs, or you're, jogging in place, or you're doing sit to stands, or you're, whatever it might be that it kind of spikes your heart rate and then allows it to come down, resting in between. And then for the zone 2, that I would try to do a little bit longer, maybe like 20 minutes, 25, 30 minutes, where you're kind of on that brisk walk, or you're getting some of that activity in that way, as just kind of a starting point and setting you on the right track there.
Another question. So doing a lot of research in regards to metabolism and weight management, looking at studies that have shown to lose weight and to maintain weight loss, you almost need to exercise, move like 300 minutes a week, which is almost 45 minutes a day. Have you heard anything about that? Like, what's your take on that?
It's very
Which is intimidating.
it's an intimidating number. It's very goes back to your previous point on variety and having different stimulus for the body. If you do the same thing, your body will adapt and it will no longer have the same response. So if right now I were to go on a 20-minute run, right? And I do that every day. And for me, like, I don't like running. That's a lot. I would not do well with that. I'd be super sore and I would hate every minute of it. If I did that and I did it every day for the next month, that would become normal for my body. It would not interpret it as a different stimulus, and it would not improve my metabolism more beyond what it initially did. It would not have those same effects hormonally. It would not have the same benefit as it did when I started it, right? And so that's where if you can do, the same activity over and over and over, and it will not have the same impact. So like our bodies are great in that they adapt, but it also kind of sucks that they adapt, right? Because it makes us have to challenge ourselves more and do more. And so to your point, I think it depends on the activity that you're doing. My argument with that would be if for 15 minutes, 3 times a week, which is 45 minutes, you push yourself hard physically with a resistance training routine, you would have more muscle, your metabolism would be higher, and you would see effects. Now, at a certain point, you'd have to change up what stimulus of exercise you do, what weights you use, different variables in that sense. But I don't think that 300-minute number is true in the resistance training realm, if that makes sense, right? And it's impossible to weigh it equally, because if you do 300 minutes of high intensity intervals versus 300 minutes of zone 2 work, it's going to be different outcomes.
Yeah, and I think it was kind of taking activity in full. Like it could be the high intensity interval, like intensity having a really good benefit, as you're mentioning, but then also steady state, and then also resistance training. Like it all kind of filters into that total amount of time.
Yep.
Okay. So then what about joint inflammation? So what if we already have inflammation that it's hard to move? Where can we start with that?
I think a big thing there, and again, I'm speaking, broadly, so it's very person specific with everything that we're talking about. But I think grading the activity to something that you can comfortably do for where your joints are at now, while at the same time working on improving the mobility that you do have. Okay, so say I really have a lot of pain in my knees with squatting, and I can't squat very well. So I could do squats to the depth that feels okay, right? So maybe if I go down to like a 90-degree angle of my knees, it's really painful. I get joint grinding. It's a little bit too much. Maybe I just keep it in a smaller range of motion that I can tolerate, where I'm still kind of feeling the muscles working, but I'm not getting the joint pain. And then when I'm resting from that exercise, or after I do that exercise, or whatever it might be, I focus on stretching my knees and just kind of getting that motion is lotion component, right? Just trying to get a little WD-40 on my joints from more of that stretching standpoint, versus just trying to okay, I need to be able to bend to 90, so I'm just going to keep doing these squats even though they hurt. I'm just going to push through it. So I think it's kind of like blending the rehab component and the training component, and doing what you can from a training standpoint, and lubricating the groove from a rehab standpoint.
Excellent. What about posture? We talked about how we sit so much during the day. What kind of thoughts do you have around the misalignments and the risk with that, and anything that we can do? I know you alluded to that a little bit earlier in regards to, kind of paying attention to where we have pain and tightness and aching, and making some adjustments. But just thinking, we have so much more sedentary time just in our social life, but also in our professional life. A lot more desk jobs, a lot more working from home. So we're behind computers and sitting a lot of our day. So what are your thoughts there?
I think the biggest thing and most simple thing that I would lean into there is having frequency of movement that's the opposite of what position that you're in. Okay, so let me kind of make that make sense more. So if I'm if I'm working on my computer, I'm going to be typically more in this type of position: forward rounded shoulders, forward head, right? Not really engaging my core, rounded low back. That's kind of where I hang out most of the day. So where I want to get is the opposite of that, and doing that frequently throughout the day, because it's more so than truly strengthening the upper back. It's more so engaging those muscles in a way where they remember how to operate correctly, right? So what I would do, super simple, is have an alarm on my phone for once every 2 hours. And I would just do sorry, I'm kind of in an awkward position here. But I would just do a chin tuck with a shoulder blade squeeze, hold for 5 seconds, relax. Chin tuck, shoulder blade squeeze, getting up nice and tall. The idea here is, with the chin tuck, you really want to elongate that back part of your neck. You should feel a stretch on your upper back, lower neck area doing this, kind of giving myself a double chin, right? So I'm not looking down, I'm not looking up, I'm just kind of bringing my head back and feeling that tension, feeling that stretch. And then when I add in the shoulder blade squeeze down and back, I really feel tension from, again, my upper back up to kind of the base of my skull of that movement. And that is something where I'm often here. So by me getting there, using those muscles, recruiting that and feeling that stretch, that can really help to offset it, especially if you do it frequently throughout the day. So what I typically tell people is do that 5 times with 5-second holds for every 2 hours that you're sitting. but you really have to audit yourself on how often you're sitting, because it's going to be a lot more than we think, right? And the other beautiful thing about that is you can do it when you're at a red light driving your car. You can do it when you're sitting watching TV. You can do it when you're reading your book. It doesn't even have to take from what you're doing, but it can just kind of offset the position that you're often in.
I love that. That felt good. Did it feel good to anyone else? Oh my gosh, that was awesome. Excellent. Well, I took up half of the hour, so I want to make sure that you guys can all ask your personal questions, because I gave you the homework assignment to come with your personal questions. So if you want to go ahead and just raise your hand, so use the reactions at the bottom of the screen, just so that it's easier for us to do one at a time. So if you hit reactions at the bottom, you can see where it says raise hand. Or you can just physically raise your hand. Liz, you found it. And then you're on mute.
Okay, you hear me? Okay, well, this all sounds great to me. And I've been in and out of exercise during my life. I am definitely more sedentary than I prefer to be, but yet I'm also more tired. I'm old, so you slow down. Now, I guess my question is, this all sounds like it would be appropriate for me, even at 74, to start at this point. This doesn't seem overly excessive to me to do. Is that correct?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think you got the right mentality on it.
Okay. And when you mentioned about getting a coach, now, I mean, I could go to the Y and get a coach there. And I know there's a lot of seniors there, so I'm sure they must be used to working with seniors, not just young people, and not push too hard, because that's my big concern, is not being pushed where I hurt myself.
Mm-hmm.
Is that so? Just get a coach that really understands senior movement, would you say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think I can do most of this at home. I think I can, but also if I did go ahead and invest in a coach, it might actually keep me doing it better.
Exactly. Yep. So there's virtual options. There's it depends on what kind of you're looking for. Future is like an app on your phone where you can get a coach, and you can kind of select your coach based on their experience, which works decently well. I can coach you virtually if you want. There's different options. I'll try to send resources to Cindy that she can follow up with you guys with, because I can't speak to all of them off the top of my head necessarily, but.
Yeah, and I think it's great just to explore a couple options too, Liz. I would do some interviews. I would look into what your options are and determine what you want. Because I know even at the Y, because especially like a one-on-one coach, just make sure that you ask your questions, you interview them, you make sure that it's a good fit for you, you feel comfortable. And even see if you can get like a little trial to see what it's going to be like. And I know if you belong to the Y, it might be interesting. At least I know they used to offer a program called Silver Sneakers, which is more for the like above 70. And so just the group community, in that sense, is also oftentimes an option. So excellent.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Cindy. Please do interview whoever you do have coach you, right? Because if something doesn't feel right, or like you said, listen to your body over anybody else. And if something's like, this doesn't seem right, but this person who's a professional is telling me to do it, don't fall into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's easy to do.
Yeah.
100%.
And as Brad mentioned, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you got to be your own best advocate when it comes to your health.
100%. And I think both Brad and I are fully aligned on that. It's like, you guys are your own best doctor. You know your body's best. And so we got to really listen to that and make sure that you have somebody who's also listening to your body. TJ and Anita.
Hello. Thank you. This has been great. I just wanted to ask, and I guess some of it was answered with Liz there, but what I guess I'll just say briefly that when the pandemic hit, I was all set, and I was retired, newly retired. I was all set to get into the gym again and really go crazy. I found out I had 2 slip discs in my lumbar. So I took treatment, and I had a physical therapist for 6 weeks, I believe. And it was great. What's very attractive here with Brad is that keeping it simple and doing it at home. I was a gym rat most of my life, so I'm kind of glad to be out of there, because there's a lot of pain involved with that, as you probably know. And at 75, I don't need any more pain if I can avoid it. I was just wondering, Brad, specifically, if you say, I would like to find out what do you see, like, people once a week, or would it be twice a week, or how would you do that? How do you work that, is what I was wondering.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's kind of person specific as far as what your needs are, what you're looking for. Typically what I would do is have a couple times where, depending on location, I would come to your house. Okay, see what do we have? What's realistically things that we can use for resistance? If it's not weights, maybe it's, hey, we can put some bags of rice in this backpack that you have, or like whatever thing it might be. Just kind of being creative with how we can do the training, and then doing the movements in person. Okay, cool. This is how we move. You feel comfortable with it, and then it makes it easier to do a plan as far as, okay, do this exercise, do this many of them, rest for this long between them. This is kind of what your week looks like, whatever that might be. But yeah, I like to, either via a FaceTime call or Zoom call like this, I like to see a person move before I really prescribe anything. And that kind of gets me an idea too, as far as like, all right, cool. Is this a one-time thing because you move pretty well and it's just these small tweaks and then we're set and we can figure out the rest of the programming? Or is this something where maybe we need a little bit more work? Or like you said, if you have an area like the low back that's bothering you, how can we adjust this a little bit into a pain-free range of motion of more things that you can do, while also having things that are more targeted for building up the robustness of the back? Because that's the benefit is, even with the slip discs and even with that history, your back can be more robust and it can be stronger, and you can be pain-free at some point because our bodies do adapt. And so that's something I would really lean into there.
That's great. Thanks. I have one of those straps that you put in the door that I've been using for resistance, and I have been able to get back to golfing. So, and I'm not looking really too bad.
Okay, hey, that makes one of us. That makes one of us. My golf game is not very good. So
thank you. That's great. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I have to just chime in for just a quick fun fact. So in case you get to meet Brad in person, sorry, Brad, you know what's coming. Hopefully you have very tall door frames. How tall are you?
6'7".
He's 6'7". He had to duck to get into my home when he first came. And I was like, holy moly. So just a fun fact.
That's great.
Beverly, you have a question.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate your time with us, and thanks, Cindy, for arranging this. I have had a personal trainer for, I think I started again in August, and I really so value what you said as advice to us. I found myself in a predicament where I was giving over my self awareness of what was working for me and what wasn't to her. It wasn't her fault. She was doing what she thought was the right thing. And so now we finally kind of got into a relationship where I'm saying, well, now, wait a minute, that's not, I have a knee that is problematic. So I want to do exactly what you were talking to TJ about. I want to build my knee. I want to use my knee. as much as possible without, building the quads, building the hamstrings, building, all those muscles, but not causing distress. And it's kind of a fine line, and we really have to take responsibility, right?
Yes.
I really appreciate also what you said about, I think I may have not been taking advantage of my home enough to do things like your snack minutes and that. And I do enjoy walking. If you're walking is one way to increase, like add weights when you're walking, or like if I walk with the same people, they tend to walk I have some people who walk, they're my fast walkers, and then other people, it's more of a stroll. So how do you keep yourself in the right zone?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I wouldn't add weights to your walking, just because it's not something that's going to functionally add resistance to the movement that you're doing, right? Because the weight is with gravity, it's just vertical. And so if there was a way to resist you propelling forward, like horizontal force, yeah, that would add resistance and it would make your muscles work harder. By just holding the weights, I mean, your shoulders will probably get a little bit tired, but it's not going to be something that progresses the activity. I would really try to, and that's why I appreciate you bringing this up, with the zone 2 exercise, which again is kind of like the walking. I wouldn't really look at that as much as something that you have to like constantly progress and change. That's more so just like staying active. And so, yeah, maybe some days you make a point of going with the faster group versus the slow group, but I don't think that it's something where with your walking, you should be worried about progression. I would focus that more so on the zone 5 or like the heart rate interval stuff. And then the resistance training is really the bold and underline for that.
Okay, thank you. That's awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Is there any benefit to, I think about like those mobility ladders, agility ladders, like where you go sideways or backwards. You got to be really careful not to fall. But is there any benefit to, like, in the sense of walking, as we walk right forward all the time? So is there any benefit to deliberately trying to walk sideways or even backwards in a safe location?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. That's something that, even in the resistance training component of it, we tend to always move sagittally, which is like forward and back, right? Everything that we do is in kind of that plane of motion. But everything that we do in life is oftentimes multiplanar, meaning like, okay, I'm going to side bend and rotate to pick this thing up off the floor, or you kind of move through different planes of motion versus just up and down, straight on. And that's where it's really important to train functionally. Like you said, like walk side to side, not saying you have to go out on the road and like be walking sideways down the road, but within your house, walk side to side, walking backwards. When you do an exercise, maybe you're doing like a squat and rotate, or maybe you're doing like a split stance deadlift, right? Where you kind of have to like rotate and hinge forward at the same time. Things that carry over to what we're going to do in our actual life are going to always be way more beneficial than just doing a straight on sagittal movement for the purpose of training, and then that maybe not carrying over quite as well to the lives that we live. So yes, I would, that's a great point.
Other questions? Beverly?
If I'm being quiet, if no one else has a question, I'll dive in. I've heard conflicting information about doing things overhead at a certain point. And I've also heard conflicting information about, yoga and stretching, and some of the positions in yoga as we age might not be as beneficial, that we shouldn't be going for stretching our low back. So I'm really interested in what you might have to say about the low back stretches, and also the, someone told me one time that someone told them, don't lift your arms over your head at a certain age because of damage to the shoulder. But then someone just told me that there's research out there that says there's a relationship between overhead movement and longevity. So there's a couple questions in there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. My answer to that would be, do you ever grab something off the top shelf of the grocery store, or grab your coffee cup that's overhead, right? It's functional. You need to be able to reach up overhead for the life that you live. And so I think whenever we make hard and fast rules, don't do this, never do that, always do this, it typically doesn't hold true. And so would I advise you going and grabbing a barbell and pushing it up over your head right now? No, probably not. But you just showed me that you can do this. So I'm sure I could add 1 pound weights to that and you could still do it. I'm sure that I could add 3 pound weights and you could do less of them, but could still do it. It's a matter of building up movement patterns that you're going to have to use in your life. So yeah, I would say definitely train in that fashion. Just don't overdo it or do something dumb, right? But I don't like hard and fast rules. Same thing with the stretches. I don't know specifically which ones you're talking about.
Just sort of forward bend would be one, or like a cobra with the, the back,
hyperextension.
or even
I think all those things are great. I think they're all great. If you can do them and it's pain-free, right? That's where listening to your body comes in. If you're able to do a cobra pose and it feels fine, why would I tell you to stop doing it? Like, there's not going to be, I guess you're probably asking, like, is there a reason physiologically that those things would be detrimental? The answer is no.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Keep
Back to the cobra.
Anyone else? And is there anything, Brad, that you feel would be really helpful to share with the group that maybe we didn't touch on yet?
Trying to think. Let me rip through my notes quick. I think we touched on all of it. Yeah, I really appreciated that last question, Beverly, because I do think that brings up a good point of just, again, like, don't, this is kind of a broad statement, but like, don't have somebody limit you, like whether it's a doctor or whether it's, a PT or a trainer or like whatever it might be. Don't have somebody limit you and say, don't do this, never do that. Like, push back and be like, why? Or is there a way I can do it modified? Or is there a way that I can do part of it? Or I just think that we kind of lose our power when somebody tells us not to do something and we then are like, okay, I'll just never do that. And I'm passionate about that point because in physical therapy, it is amazing how often I see somebody who just came from the doctor and they're like, yep, my doc said to never do this, never squat. And I was like, you just sat down in the chair in front of me. You just squatted, right? And so I think that that's something to really take away from this, is to just take your health into your own hands, and to find sources that you trust for information. And if you hear something like advice that you don't agree with, push back, right? Or find a different source for that information or whatever it might be. And I'm not saying to get confrontational with your doctors. I'm sure you guys all have wonderful doctors. I'm just saying things aren't often black and white in the health space. It's a whole lot of gray. So I don't think hard and fast rules should be something that we abide by.
That's very smart. And just knowing that we're all unique and we're going to be different as we go through our different stages of life too. So just really honoring your bodies and how they are, but knowing, with what Brad is saying is you have a potential. So if something isn't where you would like it to be, we can always improve. That's the good news. But it's just finding the right resources, finding the right people to help guide you along that path. Awesome. Well, any other questions before we close? I don't want to stop before.
Just one.
Yeah, Jody.
This is sort of a general question. Just how long can you expect if you have a muscle that does not fire to retrain that to fire if you're consistent with your exercises?
Which muscle? Give me more context.
Glute.
So that's a common one, isn't it? I hear that
Yeah.
all the time. Can you talk about that? That's a great question, Jody. I hear about like the piriformis and the glute is gluteus medius. It's not firing, it's weak. So what does that do? Can you tell people what that is, number one? And why is it a firing issue, and what does that do to our body? And how do we correct that?
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Yeah, that's good.
Get it
That's
onto
good.
Jody's.
Well, and I do have a chain issue going on, but when I'm fixing one, it creates another one. So
Yeah, that's trying to think of how to tackle that one. As far as why it happens oftentimes, is because we are seated and we're in a position where we're not really using our hip extensors, right? And they're kind of in a passive position of stretch. So typically our hip flexors are going to be tight and our hip
The front of your
extensors.
hip.
What's that?
That's
Yep.
front of the hip.
Yep. So front of the hip is usually going to be tight because I'm in this L-shaped position all the time. And my glutes, my hip extensors are going to be weak. And so oftentimes that lack of firing or lack of ability to activate those muscles as strongly is due to us not getting into positions where we have to activate them very often. As far as good ways to wake those up, like a mini band around the knees, doing hip lifts or clamshells or hip burners or whatever thing. Like I really like the mini band around the knee thing because that's going to push your knees inward and you have to use your glutes to kind of keep them out as you're doing whatever movement it might be. As far as duration on how long it takes for them to fire adequately again, I don't know. It's extremely personal dependent. It's totally based on how dormant they are. I wish I had like a hard and fast, hey, you do this for this long and you'll be good. I just don't, and I'd be lying to you if I did. The only thing I'll say is your glutes are still firing, like they're still activating, like muscle fibers are still contracting, but it's just not to the extent of that being the main mover when you do like a deadlift or a squat or something of that nature. So I would imagine that coinciding with that, you probably have some core weakness, if I were to guess. Because if all of your muscles are working in the right way, your glutes are going to be the main mover on a deadlift movement, for example. Oftentimes, if we lack core stability, then we're going to be relying on other muscles to do the job. And so it's kind of like an up the chain, down the chain issue, where if you just focus on your glutes, it probably won't be as high of yield as if you do like some glute work, some core work, and some like ankle work, because that can kind of change the position that your hips are in as well. So I'm sorry, I feel like I didn't really answer your question. I just kind of circled around it, but the truth is I don't have an answer for you.
Oh, that's fine.
Interesting. So so the hip, if the glute's not firing, can that cause other problems in the body? I know it sounds like you were saying like a weak core can contribute to that as well as the seated position. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah. I mean, it's all connected, right? So if your glutes aren't firing, you're going to put more strain on the low back and more strain on the knees. Because if one piece isn't doing their job, it makes the other pieces above and below have to do more work than they would otherwise do.
Got it. So you might have more back pain, more knee pain?
Yeah.
Okay. Very, very helpful. Well, if there's no other questions, we'll have a follow-up. So I will be posting this in the membership group, but also on YouTube. And then I'll have the resources that Brad is going to share with us, as well as how to contact Brad and a few of the fine points that you use, like your movement snacks and the mobility movements and really doing those opposing exercises, especially for like the seated, where we want to tuck our chin and really kind of think about squeezing the shoulder blades 5 times for 5 seconds for every 2 hours that you're sitting. So all of those are really good tips just to think about on a day-to-day basis. So helpful. Great clinical pearls to help us keep our function and our mobility optimal as we go through our days of life. So I want to thank you so much, Brad, for joining us, and thank you all for coming in and having such awesome questions and feedback as well. So we will be in touch. Thank you, everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Cindy.
you very
Thank
much.
you, Brad. Everybody.
Bye.
Let me turn this thing off.